Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Cameron, and thanks everybody for putting in the time this evening to join us. I know that that wouldn't have happened without Gina and Tina giving up their time on a lovely summer's evening. Well, it is down here on the island, so thank you. It's really important that this is not just an Isle of Wight issue. This is a national issue. If they had put this planning application in 2019, the year of Extinction Rebellion, we may well be having a very different conversation right now. But only 2 weeks after Boris Johnson has declared his build agenda, and that he wants to end newt counting and other such environmental issues, this is really important that we motivate and energise not just people on the island, but people across the country here. A new oil well on the Isle of Wight is completely counter to what we should be doing as a nation right now. I'm going to quickly outline the history behind this. Frack Free Isle of Wight was established, I think it was around about 2015 when I first got involved. It was a couple of people in a local, in Shanklin, in some of the meetings that I went to. But it's morphed since then, and obviously you are here because we were talking about don't drill for oil on the Isle of Wight. The licences were put out by the government. At some point there were offshore as well as onshore licences for oil and for gas, and fracking was in the news. Thank you so much to what Gina and Tina and everybody up in Lancashire had been doing, and in the world as well. But as we have seen recently, it isn't fracking on the Isle of Wight that they are saying that is going to happen. It is drilling for oil, although there is a very narrow difference between those two things. So since in the last 2 or 3 years, we've now got to the point that we have identified where UCOG want to drill for oil, and that is in Arreton. And in Arreton, they're referring to, looks like 3 different oil fields. And they reckon, I think there's 227 million barrels of oil, they reckon, underneath the Isle of Wight, of which there's only about 15 million that are recoverable. But still, that is, as far as they see, economically important. Unfortunately, the economics are not part of this planning application. Talking about the economics, how viable it is, and UCOG, UK Oil and Gas as a company, is very debatable as to the situation they're in. I think their share price is currently 0.17 pence. But that's not important at the moment in terms of the public consultation. They revealed in the middle of the general election in December last year, at a meeting, an open day at Newport Cricket Club, where this oil drilling is going to be, and that is on a field, an agricultural field between Arreton and Merston, where there's currently maize growing. And when BBC Radio Solent's reporter went yesterday, and you could see people harvesting cabbages and so on. It's prime agricultural land right in the middle of the Arreton Valley. This is not the wilds of the north. I think was it a lord referred to as somewhere we could frack. This is somewhere 600 metres from housing, and very much where our tomatoes, our chilies, our cherries, everything is grown in the Arreton Valley. We were just up to the bit where we're talking about what's actually the application. So they have applying to build a test drill well, construct a site with a security compound round about the size of a football pitch, an access road for HGVs going onto the main 60-mile-an-hour road between Arreton and Newport, and then to drill, to test and to appraise. This is a 3-year project that they are doing. I don't think I'm going to admit this person here that's in the waiting room there. This is a 3-year project, but it may well go on for 20+ years if they are happy with the flow test. They are supposed to reconstruct the site, but the site is, those of us who've been up there, it is in a beautiful area just off the area of outstanding natural beauty. The Isle of Wight last year was declared a UNESCO biosphere. It's a rural site, it's an agricultural site, it's a wildlife habitat, and they will drill up to 1,700 metres through our aquifer. The Isle of Wight is obviously very vulnerable in terms of water, and we already import 30% of our drinking water, and Southern Water have highlighted the Isle of Wight and Hampshire as somewhere where they will have to put water restrictions on in future. The Southern Water have made a comment, but it's nowhere near as firm as it needs to be for our needs when we're looking at that. And of course, these HGVs, up to 30 trips a day, they will be taking part in at the beginning with the construction of the site. They will not just be carrying oil, they will be carrying toxic waste, water, and storing this waste. When I say toxic, it's an acidization that they're planning to do to pump a toxic mix of acids down into our limestone, and then to have a horizontal well going through into our Portland limestone in order to access the oil. They drilled a borehole in the early 1970s. So they know there is something there, but they couldn't recover it until we now have those fracking techniques of using water, and yet they're going to use it as an acid mix. So really, we're in the situation in July 2020, which is 1 year to the day on Friday that the Isle of Wight Council declared a climate emergency. They said that we should aim to be carbon neutral by 2030, and yet we're having to fight an application to drill for 10 days worth of supply, UK supply of oil. That's what 15 million barrels would equate to. So the call to action that we're doing here this evening, and this is why it's so important to have Gina and Tina on the call, is not just about Friday. Friday is the deadline of the public consultation. And I urge everybody to make their objections known, not just people on the Isle of Wight. A lot of the people who are supporting this application are coming from Cheshire, from East Anglia, from Birmingham, from Doncaster. They're not here on the island, and yet they are allowed to submit their particular points of view. So we do urge people outside of regular island residents to take part in this consultation. You can do. All the information you need to do that is at don'tdrillthewight.co.uk, and I'll put that in the chat box in case anybody hasn't managed to do that. You can do it by email as well as through the planning portal. However, it's not going to end on Friday. After Friday, the planning officers are going to look at the comments, but in particular the consultee comments, the official ones from Island Roads, who have been very critical of the application in terms of safety for the roads and the fact that they haven't done the correct surveys. So there is still a lot more information that UK Oil and Gas will have to submit to continue the application further. But we need to look at what else we can do apart from object on Friday. And this is where it's been wonderful to hear from the experiences of what has happened in the Frack Free movement up in Lancashire in their fight against quadrilla since, well, for the last 6 or 7 years, probably longer on there. So I think that we're going to hear, was that 10 years, Tina? Yeah. So I think we're going to hear from Tina first. Tina Rothery from Frack Free Lancashire, from the Nanas, from Resident Action on Failed Fracking. 1,000 days of protest at Preston New Road. And I keep seeing this phrase for Tina and Gina, willful obstruction of the highways. And I'm wondering what that specifically means. And Tina, before I hear from you, I saw a phrase that you, somewhere on a website, a quote from you, saying that quadrilla did not tell the truth of the potential consequences when they applied for planning and then subsequently breached planning. And this is very clear what we're dealing with here with UCOG. They are not telling the whole picture of this site and the consequences for this site, but not just this site, the whole of the Isle of Wight here, for our water, for our roads, for our tourism, for our agricultural land, for our food growing. You know, they do not tell the picture of all of this. So thanks you, Tina. It'd be great to hear from you. And if anybody has any questions about anything I've been saying or anything Tina or Gina will say, don't be afraid to pop it in the chat box and then we can talk about that then. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Vix, and Cameron for sorting us all out. Yeah, you know, listening to you, Vix, I really wanted to hear your story more fully from you, because you're in exactly the same situation we were in. And whether they call it fracking or try to pretend it's not, that's because at some point, I think it was around 2014, they started to change the definition of fracking. So with a little less depth, a little less water, a little more water, use some acid, take a slightly different approach, and you can then decategorize it from fracking. And I think that that's one of the key things to spot in what they're doing, is to listen really closely. I remember the first lie, the first bold-faced lie they told was when I read that Quadrilla said, and then I attended a public meeting, where they said, fracking will not harm your water supply. And I thought, that's absurd. I know from women in Australia and America who I'm talking to that this absolutely damaged the water. But that was the trick. It didn't damage the water supply, it damaged the water wells. And that was it. That was the trick. They played with the words. And when you realized they were going to do that, you heard them very differently. You know, and also the other trick they said was that although fracking fracking could not cause any harm, it couldn't migrate through the path of water to the aquifers or the groundwater either. And again, that was a lie, because how to catch them on that one was that they considered the fracking as being the very tiny part of the operation where they fracture, which is to send cracks through the shale, so that as those cracks open up and they're held open by little bits of sand, the gas flows back out of them. But we see fracking as the whole operation. So if you rephrase your question to them and say, does the operation of a frack site from start to abandonment, is there any risk in that to any form of water supply? It's just framing our questions better and understanding the spin they use, you know. And once we started asking better questions, we managed to get them to squirm a lot. You'll notice as well, I don't doubt, Vix, going to public meetings on the island, that when they turn up at the public meeting, UCOG or Quadrilla, whoever you have at the time, it's always the same. They send you these people and you go and you ask them a question, and they first go, that's a great question. And they write it down. They go, give me your email. I'm going to get someone to get back to you on that. And I can honestly say in 10 years of fighting fracking, not once did they ever get back to me, and I attended every public meeting. And that's because the guy they send to the public meeting is not an engineer. He's not health and safety. He's nothing. He's a PR guy. He's come from a marketing agency. His job is to win you over. His job is to act like the good guys and wear a suit. And that's all his job is. They really underestimate the intellect and determination of people when they are defending the most important things in their lives, their families, their home, their community, the environment they depend on. And I find that so belittling, but in some ways beneficial, because it makes me so bloody angry to be treated like that, that it possibly makes me slightly more forceful and fierce, which is probably no bad thing when you're under 5 foot, not very fierce. So the way we looked at it, so it started in 2011 when they did a test drill in Blackpool that no one really noticed, except that it made a little earthquake. And then all of a sudden everyone knew about it. I didn't know about it before then. And then once we knew about it, then 3 small groups in the country set up at the time, which was a national one, Fracking Hell, Frack Off, and then there was Residents' Action on Failed Fracking and another one at Ribble Estuary. And when they were doing that, they were objecting, but there were tiny groups, you know, like a handful of people in each group. And what we felt we needed to do was to outreach to make sure that people in communities across the country, because 65% of the UK was up for fracking at the time, we needed to get to every single one of those license areas and tell them the truth. And to me, it was always the best was face to face, you know, whether you went to a church hall and had 10 people or, you know, a massive venue and had a couple of hundred, either way, you needed to have that human contact with people. And for us, when we went in and explained the facts of fracking, and just as you did, this is the depth it goes to, it passes through your aquifer. So if it passes through your aquifer, what protects your aquifer? Oh, well, that's a steel pipe with some cement in it. Do steel and cement last the lifetime of the planet, thus protecting that aquifer all of eternity? Well, no. Obviously they don't. At some point, these things will perish. And when they perish, what will come through? What's been left behind? How much waste is down there? You know, in 2014, they put through, and they got it passed as law, a change to, I can't remember what the law was called now, it was quick. And it was to say that they may leave anything underground that they choose to during a fracking operation. Anything. Bits of equipment, waste materials, because each time they frack, half of what they push down stays underground and only half comes back up. And where does that go? Well, you know, the European mining rules would have said you have to monitor, you know, within a 30-mile radius for 20 odd years what that is doing. Where is that liquid going? But we don't. We just refused. The companies here just refuse to do it. Other tricks they'll play with you is they'll say, like they did to us, it's all right, we're going to voluntarily do an environmental impact assessment. You think, wow, that's great. We didn't have to push you to do that. But of course, the difference between a voluntary one and one that you have to do is you don't have to do bugger all afterwards. You can find anything you want, but because you volunteered to find it, you don't have to act on it. You know, so, I mean, they're tricky. And so you have to be tricky back. And the first thing they'll do when you start to campaign, and especially when people off your island come to join you, is to say, oh, it's those out-of-towners, it's the bought-in activists, the professionals. But of course, when you're campaigning and no one from the outside comes in, you're a NIMBY. You just care about your backyard. You don't care about the country. And I asked once, what is the ratio from a drill site that is considered optimal to be an acceptable complaint? Because if I'm too far away, I'm an outsider. If I'm near it, I'm a NIMBY. Where is it? I'm allowed to complain. And of course, there is no choice with that. But the one thing I will say that in the last 10 years of fighting this is I have never been more enriched either. What you discover, although it's an awful thing to have to fight, it's awful to face the legal consequences, awful to spend time in jail cells if you do, or to experience any police brutality and things like that. It is a really awful thing to ask of yourself to go through this. But along the way, every face you look at that's standing beside you is a bloody hero to you. You know, you are shoulder to shoulder. And I think one of the most important things we discovered along the way when trying to unify incredibly diverse groups of people, you know, from your average mum who's just scared about her kids' health and literally only local, to, you know, radical activists who've been at this all their lives trying to save the planet, to unite these people against one thing is to only talk about that one thing. Do we want to stop this site right here, right now? Yes, we do. Who do you vote for? What do you believe in? What's your football? Who's your God? None of that matters. Because if it does, you start to divide and divide and divide. And that is everything that the media and these companies want you to do, is to divide up into your factions. You know, there was the professionals and the residents, and the police did that with us. Fortunately, I bridged both. I'd been fighting fracking for a long time before Preston New Road, which is my hometown. And so I was a resident, but I was also one of those hardline, horrible outside activists. And so I experienced what it was like and where they tried to split us off. And so we literally did this on purpose, right? We took some of our most radical, scary activists as far as the police were concerned, and some of our loveliest knitting grandmas. And we made sure they were always together on a line. Because once you start showing that true unity, it becomes real anyway. You know, I remember sending off We have he used to be quite a drinker, I think possibly still is, and into the old punk rock world, along with one of the nice ladies from the Parent Teacher Association, who had nothing in common. And we had to send them to do a meeting, and they were in a car for over an hour, and I waved them off and thought, what will you have to talk about to find unity? And that's a friendship that endures to this day, you know? There are things that we don't imagine in life, particularly as we get older. We maybe think we've had all those first experiences, but until you do activism, you really haven't. You know, there are things you will not know that you can find within yourself that you will do. Because I think that the way I always saw it, and I don't know if this is of any help to anybody, but along the way there are a lot of distractions and a lot of things to pull you off the fight. But to me, I have a red dot, and it is stop this industry. And every decision I make, I consider, does it bring me closer to my red dot, or does it pull me further away? And if it pulls me away, can I pick up anything and bring it back with me? And if none of those things occur, then bugger that. I'm sticking with my red dot. I'm going to put one foot in front of the other and keep on going for it until the damn thing is done. And I think that's all you can ask of yourself. And again, in activism, I think it's really scary for a lot of people. It was terrifying to me when I first did any activism in 2011. I was terrified. I'd never done public speaking, and I'd not ever stood up to a police officer. I'd never said no firmly and meant it. And yet you had to. And then you found within yourself that, because the question is my granddaughter going to still be able to breathe clean air and drink safe water and live on a planet that's inhabitable, or have we screwed her whole future? Then what do you do? How does that what will pull me off the road now? I saw Britta's little child come in a minute ago, and it's like, I see it this way, Britta, like my granddaughter is in front of me, and over there are the frackers, and they're coming at her, and we can't be certain with what they're doing isn't going to harm her. And what is it going to take to move me off the road and give them a free run at her? Nothing at all. And so once you know that of yourself, you know you can find that in other people. And I think that's the thing, is keeping the human reasons, not just it's an environmental disaster, and yes it is, but sometimes talking about the environment and climate doesn't make it personal enough to get people to come and risk their own standing in society, their own time, and like I say, some of the more brutal actions that happen. But also to, in the fight, in trying to engage everybody that you need to join you, and you need everyone on that island to feel they have a stake in this, is to offer them ways to act and give them a chance to object at different levels. So one day someone will probably sit on a truck outside of the drill site, and they will be big and brave and strong. But before you get to that stage, people will sign petitions. They'll beep a horn, even that sign that says honk support. That is the first step in for many people. And there was an occasion on Preston New Road during those 1,000 days where a man drove up and he beat his horn for the first time, and he was quite excited. He'd never supported any action at all. And a police officer walked across the road and said, "If you do that again, I will arrest you." And he just looked at her and was stunned that this could actually be. So he was like, "Don't be ridiculous. I just beat my horn." And she said, "I mean it." And then she walked off. But as she walked off, he saw her smirk at one of the other officers. He then, within 2 weeks, this is no word of a lie, arranged a 100-car convoy of beeping vehicles to go down that road to make his point. But this was a man who was just he works with the takeaway down the road, he helps with the deliveries and things, and he has a small business on the side. He is not an activist, he was never part of our world. He just thought, look at those people standing in the rain again, I'll give them a quick beat. And then realized that he lives in a society that is not what he imagined. I watched this too, just to make this my last story, sorry, in Balcombe in 2013 when there was drilling down there. And I sat next to a man who was reading his usual newspaper, and we were in the coffee shop, like tea and scones and things. And we looked out the window, it was a beautiful day, it was a beautiful village. The villagers got on exceptionally well with the camp and the activists, everyone was very close. Villagers would come down in the evenings and sit around the campfire and get engaged with people. It was lovely. And this man and he was an elderly gentleman, and it said on the front page of his newspaper, "Rampaging activists tear apart sleepy village." And he just looked at me and he said, "Do you know what?" And this was really heartbreaking, actually. He said, "I have read this paper all of my life, And I have just realized that it does not reflect reality. And I don't recognize what's true anymore. And that was really sad, I think, to have got through life and just come to that realization. But I think you do, because, you know, I never wanted to be a single issue. I wasn't even environmentalist. I was deeply concerned that I think we have a corrupt system of government, that I don't think it serves the people. I think it serves industry. But I didn't think about it in relation to the environment until fracking came along. And then I realized that actually drilling is a perfect example of every single thing that's wrong, that it can help people to understand the harms of capitalism, when nobody wants to say, I don't want to go shopping for shoes anymore. And that's what I used to think capitalism meant. You know, if you went against it, it meant you couldn't go shopping and enjoy life, but it isn't that. And people come to that realization. I think we accept that people come to this fight at all sorts of different levels of awareness. And if they're fresh in, there's going to be a lot of horrible things they'll realize. Councillors are not well informed, except Gina and you, obviously, are not well informed. Your MP is towing his party line. He doesn't really care. The police will be brutal if they have to, because that's what they're told to do. And they are used essentially as a private security firm for these companies because the government makes them do it. That the companies have no interest other than finance. And really, you're pretty much on your own. And that even though you thought your vote gave you democracy, it didn't. Because when push comes to shove and you need it most to be on your side, that government will overturn you and change decisions to make it go their way, not yours. So if I was saying that I was going to give any advice, I would say, A, be good to yourself. B, be really creative. Find fun ways to engage with this and make sure that you're always showing the human you are. We became nanas because it used to say, you know, Tina Rothery, activist, tree hugger, eco-warrior, when I did media. But when it started saying Tina Rothery Nana, people looked at me differently and realized that this was, my purpose is to save my grandchild, not to be a radical activist, because that's what they will want to get you. You know, it's a hearts and minds thing, and that keeping it really human. So, and not losing anybody along the way, you know, regardless of their beliefs in other things and whatever you don't agree on, none of that matters. You deal with this single objective, get this place closed, and we'll worry about everything else later, you know. So I want to cover people, place, purpose, unity, diversity. And I know you said it wasn't so much to worry about with the finances yet, Vix, but in all honesty, we crippled ours down to from $1.20 a share to 3 cents now. And there is a huge joy in watching that stock market every single day bounce to your actions. So we blocked the site for 3 days with a truck serve or knitting or a lock on, and all of a sudden the share price had dropped. They'd get a good ruling in government, it'd go up again. We'd go and poo-poo that ruling and bring it back down again. It was a ride. But you fight from every angle, using every tool you can find, whether it's knitting or simply bearing witness or beeping your horn. There'll be a way, and if you can make it fun, it'll keep you going. You know, we did 1,000 days non-stop. You couldn't do that if you didn't sing, dance, share food, and learn to love, you know, the way, what you were doing. So I think that's really important too. I think I've talked enough, have I? I don't even check the time.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Tina. Thank you. I think what you're saying about acting and getting involved at different levels really resonates. And I know that's what we're seeing at the moment in the Don't Drill the White group and the meetings. And I can see Steve's here from Don't Drill the White, and we're seeing all the demographics possible, you know, wanting to get involved at their particular level. And we're just starting out here quite small.
That's really exciting too, though. And I will say it was the biggest learning curve, was to sit with people who were very different from me in all their other beliefs and find that same space that we did believe in and learn to change some of my viewpoints because of them. It's really enriching. You know, it is a hardship and a sacrifice, but it is deeply enriching. And, you know, at least every day you get up and you act with purpose. You don't sit under someone else's fluorescent tube making them some money. You know, you're up there, you're out there, you're doing something, and life matters, you know?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tina. And I'm sure if we're here in a big public meeting, we'd all be clapping what you've said quite much more audibly than the thumbs up and the claps that we're getting here. Tina's talked to us a lot about campaigning and activism and getting directly involved. But there are other ways to fight it. The economic thing is spot on, and it's just not a viable consideration for this particular public consultation. But already we can see the share price is collapsing, and the shareholders are surprised when they have seen and reported on forums that young people on the Isle of Wight are getting activist and taken to the streets. And we've got a whole team of young people who've been knocking on doors and so on with that, which has been really, really good to see. If we can turn to Gina Dowding now, who's a Lancashire County Councillor and a Lancaster City Councillor, like my granddad was back in the day. And he was an alderman of the City of Lancaster, Gina. His name on the board. He was an alderman 35 years ago, something like that. Wow. And obviously a former MEP for 7 months, 8 months, something like that, for the Green Party in the northwest of England. Because we can't just fight this through activism and campaigning and public consultation. There's all different sorts of way in which we can take that part. So over to hear from Gina how we can use other methods in which to make our voices heard. Thanks, Gina.
Great. Thank you, and thanks so much for inviting me, for Cameron for organising it, and it's nice to see a nice group of people, and hello to Tracy and Mac there from Lancaster. Mac was a former Lancaster councillor, and he's now on the Zoom meeting. So I just thought to try and complement the stuff that Tina's been saying, I give you a perspective as a councillor. And before I start that, just to say, you know, I didn't set out in life to become a councillor or a politician for any party, and it was really circumstances that led me to do that. And if anything, my mission when I started to get involved in politics was around global poverty. That's what it was, a visit and some voluntary work in Bangladesh that started making me think about how do we make change in society. And that's what led me personally towards being involved in party politics. I did a bit of research. I decided at that time the Greens was where I thought had the best solutions, not just to local, national, but also international issues. And at that time I had no intention at all of being a politician myself. But it also, that kind of interest in party politics suited me personally, because I never saw myself as an activist, and I didn't really, wasn't really comfortable with that idea of standing, putting myself forward or being the centre of attention of things. And there we are, how things change. So just in terms of fracking, I did have 2 terms on the city council, and I'm back on the city council now. And when we talk about city in Lancaster, we mean like the district level, because we've got the 2-tier authority. I've done 8 years. I had a break, and then the person who was a county councillor for the area that we hold the division, and bear in mind we only have 1 Green, he was moving away, and I decided I'd sort of stand for that seat. So it was a seat the Greens had held, and it was. Yeah, I got elected in 2013, and it was sort of maybe just as I was, we were making the decision that I was going to stand in that seat. Chris Coates, his name was, he said, "Oh no, we've got some bad news. Fracking is coming from America to Lancashire." And my reaction was, "Oh, not something else we've got to argue against." You know, thinking that this was, you know, sort of an academic thing. And then, of course, things took off, and I got elected in 2013. I think I met Tina around that time, but never knew at that time that we'd be working so closely together. So just to go back, the whole thing that you're all interested in and that we've now got experience on is like being aware of what's your theory of change. You want to change things, and there's different ways of tackling it. And I think you summarise it. You want to change hearts and minds of the people in the public. You've got to work with the media. Some of them won't be as sympathetic, but you've got social media. You want to influence your elected representatives on the council. Ultimately, though, for this kind of thing, we want to be affecting national government and our MPs. And all of that comes together. And so no matter what you're doing, those are the people that you are trying to influence when you start this journey. And I was going to say, there's that old ancient Chinese curse, may you have the builders that, you know, the Chinese say to their enemies, and it's a bit like, may you have the frackers and the drillers, because basically life changes when they come to your town, that's for sure. So I was elected, but I was the only Green on the county council. So whilst there was a kind of developing movement, I was looking at, well, what opportunities can I take to bring this to the media through my role as a councillor. So just as an example, I was doing a bit of research. I hadn't even remembered, but at the very beginning, October 2013, I was elected in the May. And this, I brought a motion to the council, and this was actually with the support, I think, from Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace, I can't remember. And it might sound really strange, but at that time, one of the big issues around fracking was that it was new, and all the regulations that they were going to be using applied to other techniques. So they weren't developing anything industry specific to fracking. So it was a bit of a convoluted campaign, but my motion was about calling on government to introduce industry specific regulation for the fracking industry. And it kind of sounded odd, because it sounded a bit like, well, if they just do that, it'll all be fine. But of course, they were never going to do that. And that's what Friends of the Earth knew. And that's why it was about saying to government, we're not having this, you know, this isn't safe. So it just gave us loads of reasons to be talking about the dangers of fracking. And Tina's already talked about it. You know, I'm assuming everybody in the room knows the risks. But so, and I know that some people were a little bit suspicious. Why do you want to be doing a motion like that? But it was the opportunity to get the press coverage, to talk about the risks involved with fracking. And then I brought another couple of motions, and bear in mind that I needed cross-party support for everyone. You know, I needed somebody to second it. But on the whole, because we were able to kind of get a little bit of lobbying of all of the councillors before the council meeting, so that, you know, I'd say, oh, I'm going to be introducing this topic to a full council meeting, and then people would write to their own councillors. So that was another form of kind of campaigning around that topic. Most of the motions at full council actually got full cross-party support. Another one was in February 2015, the government had produced a report on the impacts on the rural economy of fracking, and I don't know whether people remember, but basically they published it, and it was so heavily redacted you just couldn't actually read anything, because it was just full of black ink crossing stuff out. And so the motion then was about calling on the government to release an unredacted report. So that was kind of like what I was doing as a councillor. But before that, telling people, I'm going to be doing this, everybody please write to your local councillor asking them to support it. I wasn't even on the Development Control Committee, so, you know, I'm presuming your application is going to your either Development Control or Planning Committee, which was what happened in Lancashire. And I didn't even get a place in that as one out of 84 councillors. But we had some independents in Lancashire, and they started to get really, really concerned about the numbers of people who were just making a fuss about fracking. And they actually, one of them to this day is really a bit of an unsung hero here in Lancashire. He's an independent councillor, and he still says, I'm not against fracking, but he was against the lack of transparency. And that, you know, that was what motivated him. And so, like, yeah, I'll work with this man if he's going to try and put a stop to it because of the lack of transparency issue, regardless of the other concerns. So, you know, it was about finding what of the issues upset different people from their different political persuasions and working with them on that. Some of the things that Tina hasn't mentioned, but obviously you'll be thinking about, is actually how you communicate with people. So, you know, are you producing leaflets? Have you got information sheets as well as stuff online? So I think, as Tina says, you can't beat personal contact, and knocking on doors or stalls is one of the best ways to be raising public awareness. But if you've got leaflets that then, if they're not in, you know, you can be dropping things off with people. And we certainly, as the Greens in Lancaster, we never produce a leaflet with a demonstration photograph on it or anything about protesters, because we're just giving people the facts and a nice smiley face of the person with a quote of why they don't like it. That's what we go for, so it's like, there's no doubt about it that some of the direct action images scare people off. And we don't always have control over which images people kind of remember. And so that's just always worth bearing in mind. So I actually talked to Caroline Lucas at one stage and was saying to her, we're doing all this work in Lancashire and you just sometimes wonder, it's not getting onto the national media. Okay, it's on social media, but, are we really having the effect that we want? And bearing in mind that sometimes, we were getting negative publicity for some of the direct action. And I thought it was a really interesting insight in her response, because she said, don't worry, all the MPs are seeing what's going on outside the gates of Preston New Road, whether it's in the national media or just on social media, and they don't want that in their constituencies. So even though we felt sometimes, we're not making the breakthrough, we're not getting the coverage, there's no doubt about it that this was it was on MPs' radar. And so bear that in mind when you're saying that this is a national issue, is that there will be people interested. So everything you do is absolutely worth it, not just for the Isle of Wight, but for the wider country, because MPs will not want any of that fuss in their patch. What else was I going to say? I think so just to tell my personal story, from being a little bit of a reserved non-activist, I'd rather sit in the boring council meeting type. It was only after I started visiting the site, because I felt I had to be there. I can't just say, I support you, but I'm going to do it in the council chamber. And started going weekly from when the developers moved on to start building the site. And I was just so impressed with the work that the nanas were doing, and the way that they operated, and the way that they were so inclusive. And I think that's really important, that everyone was welcome. It didn't matter whether you were only there for an afternoon or whether you were there for an hour. And what's more is you've got a cup of tea. And somebody has commented on this: make your activists or your visitors welcome, because it really makes a difference. Because most people come and they're also looking for a bond. They're motivated by the issue, but everyone's nervous when they move into a new crowd. And that welcome, and that's what Tina was, and her sister Julie were just so fantastic in doing. They just were absolutely setting a tone for that kind of direct action, which is scary to some people. Then I have to tell you this: after a while, it got to the stage where I was saying, maybe we could use some of these days when it's quiet. Some of us could go off and do some leafleting or talking to people, or maybe we could hold a stall. And there were some of the women there who actually thoroughly enjoyed being at that site, and they weren't going to go and talk to people. They wanted to be there facing down the police. And if you'd have told them that, I think 6 months earlier, they never would have believed you. So that working together is so important. And I think being open to newcomers, always thinking about, thinking ahead, what's the next thing we can do? What's another kind of publicity strategy, or a way of getting publicity? And Gina hasn't mentioned some of the fun we had. And I'll just share, some of you might have seen this, but I'll just share it, because I always think ideas grow from thinking about other things. But we had a month of direct action with support from a national group, Reclaim the Power, and there were lock-ons, and that's when I took part in the first day of that month of lock-ons by invite, and I hardly felt as though I could refuse. And there were 13 of us locked on from, I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning, with our arms in metal pipes, so that the police couldn't cut us out. And
can I just add that was so brave, but it made such an impact because our local councillors did it. The fact that you locked on meant 1,000 times more than one of us locking on, because it was a councillor. It added a huge amount of credibility.
And what was great as well is that I was a county councillor, but there was also an independent councillor on Fylde Borough Council, Julie Brickles, and an independent councillor on the Town Council of Kirkham. So we had like the three levels of local government all represented, and we were all involved in that. And then there were other people like a retired civil servant and all sorts of other important people as well. But you know, we used our professional background, if you like, for that lock on.
And you each had a little blackboard, didn't you, next to the
Yes.
person who was locked on, a little blackboard saying councillor, you know, retired civil servant, music teacher. It was fantastic.
Yeah, and it really, and I think that also garnered a bit more support. That was I think the 3rd of July, and I know that you've been outside that gate, Tina, every day since the 6th of January, and I'd been coming weekly. But that was that kind of that first 6 months. But then I can't remember exactly whose idea generated this, but because we were always talking about the lack of democracy and the fact that by this stage, when they were building the site, the development, let's not forget that our planning committee refused the application and it was overturned by national government. So we had that whole argument about democracy and who's in control here. And so we used that a lot. And I know as well some other people, so, you know, I've talked about the councillor being upset about transparency, but there were other people very upset about the lack of democracy. Not that bothered about the fracking, but really upset that government dare to control what's going on in their local area. So it was, I think we were on 2018 then, and it was the 100 years of the suffragette, the women getting the vote for the first time. So somebody, amazingly, Kate, produced these impromptu suffragette outfits, and she just kept making them, and we ended up with about 80 white skirts, white shirts with sashes, and we got hats. And so we had another opportunity for a really good visual, women dressed in white. So it tied in with the thing that Tina and Julie had started on a Wednesday morning. And we went down to Parliament Square and we had a big protest in Parliament Square. And it was such fun. It was absolutely brilliant. And my personal idea, because I am a Strictly fan, on a Saturday night, Strictly Come Dancing. We did and when the Strictly comes to Blackpool, you know, for the semi-final or the one before that, I thought it would be great. And bear in mind, we'd all started doing some dancing outside the gate. We had a Strictly No Fracking event underneath Blackpool Ballroom Tower on the same day that they came to Blackpool. And it was freezing. It was absolutely freezing. It was November. But anyway, we danced and we tried to get some publicity out of that as well. So I think, you know, keeping up your spirits is really important. Looking for ways of getting different people involved. And we had lots of people would take some really good photographs, never wanted to be in front of a camera, but would do that behind the scenes stuff. So I just want to talk about as well the other partners that you need to involve. And you've already got a Frack Free group, there'll be Friends of the Earth groups, there'll be church groups, just reaching out to all existing groups and inviting them to be involved or going to speak to them. I'm sure you'll have that on your radar. To get people involved. And I just wanted to say one final thing, actually, which is really interesting, because you mentioned about me being former MEP. I mean, I just had that very, very lucky experience for those 8 months to represent the Northwest. But interestingly, in Europe, from a European legislation point of view, there is little that Europe can do around to prevent fracking or drilling at a national level. The only thing that the European legislation could do was to actually control the content of the fracking fluid. So I didn't even have long enough there to actually get to grips with trying to promote any legislation or pushing anything forward. So this is a national issue. It's our government that has control over the prospects for drilling. And I wish you all the best of luck, and maybe we'll come down and see you at some stage. But I think you're absolutely right, Vix, to say you're just at the beginning of a journey. What you will find is it will be an amazing one, and that you will get lots of support. Look after each other and yourselves. Make sure you have some fun. Don't give up if you don't get the right attention, and try and control the agenda. And Tina will always be there with a good story from her history to tell you and keep you going, I'm sure.
Thank you, Gina. So if anybody's got any questions, if you want to use the reaction button and put a thumbs up or something, I'll write your names down and I'll go through it in order. And then I'll invite you to speak if you take yourself off mute. So obviously use the thumbs up button if you'd like to speak or ask any questions. So there's a reactions button you can click. So Vix, what question do you have?
Well, I noticed there's a question in the chat about the environmental plan that's put forward, and whether that needs to be part of planning, because I know that Tina talked about it, and that sometimes they do it voluntarily. I'm sure Steve from Frack Free Isle of Wight here knows a little bit more about that, but from what I can gather, that was not compulsory, but it was requested by our planning officers, and then they put one together and then submitted it.
Recall in our circumstance, it was a case of the size of the site, and it did like 0.99 of a hectare, because you had to have an environmental impact assessment if it was 1 hectare. So they built to 0.99 of a hectare, so they were bound to do it, and they could therefore do. And as I say, we were very naive back then and really believed that their choosing to do it was a real sign of good faith to the community, that they were actually going to look at the environmental impact. Oh, how stupid we were, you know, that was our imagining they were those people, which they weren't.
Just to add to that, it occurred to me that could be, from the councillor's point of view, the first thing that you hook onto as a council in a council motion separate to the planning committee, you know, what to call for a stronger or a more detailed environmental impact assessment, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny what you said, Gina, about independent councillors. It's the independent councillors, in particular, Councillor John Medland, who is a councillor in Freshwater, not on the site, but he has put forward, like you did, you know, motions for the last 3 or 4 years about it. And he put forward recently a motion about the fact that we're having to fight this in the middle of a global pandemic, and a shutdown, and the lack of access to, you know, documents, the record office, you know, things outside of social media, and keeping. I think that's going to go to the planning committee to be discussed. That they diverted it from full council to planning. But I've got 2 questions to ask. One is, I suppose, to Gina most. How best can we influence our councillors? We have a sizable number of independent, a number of Conservative councillors, and obviously people on the planning committee. Is it best to email them? Is it best to, you know, contact your local councillor or to contact the planning committee? What's the best way we can influence the local councillors? Because that's the next stage for us. And the second question, so I can stop talking. What obstacles do you think we are going to have because we're an island? I know that having the fracking in the northwest and in Lancashire may well have provided obstacles in terms of getting people there, getting activists there, and getting people to support us. I'm also concerned that we're an island, and obviously we've got a number of people here that are very concerned about it, but this is a big national issue and a regional issue. And I can see, like you said, people from Portsmouth are on the call, people all over the country are on the call. How can we, do you think that being an island is going to be an extra complication for us when getting people to come on board? So I guess Gina first with the councillor question.
Yeah, so just in terms of contacting your councillors, so I had loads of hard copy letters sent to me that through a stall, I think, that Friends of the Earth had organised, where they'd literally given people letters to sign, and then I think that, you know, Friends of the Earth posted them. So there's all different ways you can do it. That's the only time I've ever had hard copy of things. Obviously, it's easiest for most people to email their councillors, but one thing I would say is encourage people to put a slightly different heading in the subject heading, even if they use a standard letter. so that it doesn't look like it's another of the same thing. I mean, obviously, whatever's easiest for people, and something's better than nothing. But I would say, and I know, you know, people, if they're not totally familiar, they might not want to change the words. They want a standard letter, but just changing the subject heading helps. And anything that you say personally at the beginning, changing the words at the beginning so it looks like it's a different angle. I think, well, both. So generally you should contact all your councillors, and they are available on the council website. Who's your local councillor? You know, if you type in your postcode, you'll be able to find out who that is. There is also, if you go on the website, there'll always be a list of all the planning committee members, and you can get hold of their emails. But that's the sort of thing, as a campaign group, you can just make sure you've got on your website and list. But I would say, actually, to be really honest, all councillors, because I don't know what the makeup of Isle of Wight is. In Lancashire, ours was actually a minority Labour administration when all this started. And now it's an overall Conservative majority. So the Development Control Committee will be made up proportionally according to it, whoever, but they will be discussing it as a group, even though they're not meant to be led by a group decision. So the more councillors, the better.
If I can come in on councillors, from the activist perspective, there's two ways of looking at this. I mean, for a start, Gina mentioned earlier that, you know, they were asking about like examining different aspects of it. But to us as activists, not aware of how the council situation was working, we were hearing, like, from people like Gina, what do you mean you're even going to negotiate this? As far as we're concerned, the whole thing should not exist. Not really understanding that Friends of the Earth and the councillors were saying, yeah, but if we ask them to live up to this standard, they will financially be crippled and environmentally impossible. But a lot of activists, and in fact a lot of councillors, were seeing from our perspectives. And the point is to deliver that information as to what is your methodology? Why are you doing it that way? So when Friends of the Earth said, yeah, but if they do this, they can't actually make any money, then we got it and we were on side with them. But initially it took some, you know, leveling out between your more dramatic activists and their, you know, slow and plodding along, as that looks like councillors are to us. Another thing I would add about councillors that we found with ours in the early days was it's a complex subject, you know, and councillors, unlike activists, if I'm concentrating on fracking, that's my subject. But a councillor has to know a million subjects. You're dealing with education, healthcare, your community aspects, and you can't be expected to know everything. So the biggest gift we can give anyone with experience and knowledge or campaigning is to summarise concisely for a councillor what that means to his district and the chances of him getting voted back in, because he has to fight for those people, and that's what he cares about. And with this, with the Paul Hayhurst, who you were mentioning, this councillor up here who became somewhat of a hero, on the day we did succeed in getting it, you know, rejected in council before they overturned it, people were singing, there's only one Paul Hayhurst, and they were singing about him. And he said, and I was standing next to him, and he's made a real strong point, I am not against fracking. I am not an anti-fracker. It's not my reason. My reason is they are lying and I want to get to the truth. And that was perfect. I didn't want another anti-fracker on board. I wanted someone who was seeing another aspect that was wrong, because it's not just environmental, it is the democracy that they're messing with. It's our media that they're manipulating. Those things matter too. And for our councillors to inform them very clearly and concisely. And what happened to us when we were out planning at the council before we got it rejected, on the last day, they deliberately carried over from the Friday to the Monday. They always do this, so that your numbers that came to support you on that last day will not be there if they make another delay, because who can make another day off work? It reduces your numbers. They play tricks. But not just that. They told those councillors on that last day, they brought a man up from London. This was totally illegal. And each councillor was taken individually and told, if this doesn't go through, the financial responsibility for the losses in this area are on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Now, that is totally wrong. Friends of the Earth's lawyer said, you cannot do that, and wrote a piece of legal advice. And then they asked the council chamber, can we hand this out before everybody breaks up on the Friday? And they were told no. So each councillor was feeling this burden of this threat from Westminster. So what we did was, in every single councillor received that information, that legal document that he needed to be able to object safely and know he was legally safe, by hand delivering over the weekend to every councillor. Now,
just to come in, that was the councillors on the Development Control Committee that were influenced.
Sorry, on DevCon, and that was where Friends of the Earth are your friends. They understand planning. They make their legal department available to you. You utilize them for everything from setting up and pulling down a rally to monitoring the planning to giving you legal advice. They're amazing. You know, there's all sorts of other groups that you can tie in with, and I'm sure you already have. But Friends of the Earth, to me, were just faultless in that. I mean, there were things they do or don't do that don't always suit me. But for what I needed them for, they've been just champion. They really have, you know.
I just want to tell you one more story before I forgot to step.
I love your stories.
I was always looking for an opportunity. One of our council meetings, one of our Conservatives who represents a very rural area was complaining during a debate, nothing to do with fracking, about the fact that the constabulary had decided not to provide marshals or be present on, I think it's called Lancashire Day, but it's not a big thing in Lancaster, but in some of the rural villages, it's like a village. It's like one of those days where, you know, everybody comes out, and she was complaining that the police had said they didn't have the resources to provide marshalling for Lancashire Day celebrations or whatever it is. And I said, the police not coming? I can give you a tip if you want the police in your Lancashire Day. Just tell them it's an anti-fracking protest. And what's more, I can supply you with all the banners. And even the whole council actually did find its sense of humour for that one. But, you know, it was just literally bringing it up at every opportunity. And there were loads of things that we haven't talked about. So we did actually work with our local MP, and we took down a petition with Friends of the Earth orchestrated it, but it was a Labour MP, Green councillor, and a few protesters, and we delivered a petition to Downing Street. There were loads of other things, Tina, that sort of events that we did to attract media attention during that time. I can't remember them all this evening.
With councillors and MPs?
No,
I mean,
generally, yeah, but yeah, all over the show. I mean, we held public meetings, didn't we?
Did. And rode on a tank with Vivienne Westwood and declared a war on fracking at David Cameron's house. That was a good day. I enjoyed that one. Took a field with Emma Thompson and her sister and managed to set up a British Bake Off. And you know, the things you can do, and if you can pull in your celebrities, they're fabulous too. You know, they work alongside you. But we were really lucky too in that 1,000 days at the roadside. On Wednesdays, we had the day where the women danced and sang. But on Mondays, we had a Green Monday every Monday. And we used to invite important people who were respected. So George Monbiot came, Donut Economics, Kate Rayworth, that amazing Julia Steinberger. People who were respected and honoured as academics, authors, you know, people who were known, MPs, you know, John Corbyn came, John McDonnell came, and, you know, even our party has my heart because Jonathan Bartley slept in a field for us, you know, and Jenny came and Caroline came and everyone came. And when we said, Jonathan, we're doing a week's camping, will you join us for a green camping? Yeah, absolutely, no worries. And did it, you know, he roughed it with us. And there's not that many politicians will do that for you.
One thing I was going to say, sorry, just on that is obviously the kind of physical demonstrations really don't have in some ways don't have a place until the drilling starts, you know what I mean, until there's a site. And so you've got a long way to go until you need to be planning for that. You need to be planning all the other things, and outside county hall or the town halls and the meetings. But being on, you know, that was generally like the focal point because it was actually trying to slow down the industry as they were developing the site.
I agree, although there are some stunts, like a lot of the stuff we did that was before the site, like when the Nanas took the field in 2014, we took the field that we'd eventually have to defend in 2017. Yeah. But we didn't know when it would come or if it would come, but we took it for 3 weeks while it was an empty field to say, we're just a couple of campers and tent pegs, would you rather have drill rigs and hundreds of workers ploughing through these fields for a few years, you'll then bugger off and leave you a mess. And so there are things you can do to draw attention to the place that will be spoiled and ruined.
Yeah.
But mainly your work really at this stage, I would say personally, is definitely your outreach, your making sure that the right people are paying attention to your campaign and that you're informing your councillors so that they are never feeling that they can't answer a question on it or form an opinion, you know. Maybe setting up a couple of, and we tried years. That was really difficult to get. The most you could do would be to hope to get someone from the environmental agency or whatever, and try and get someone from an agency who's somewhat credible to come on board and have a debate. So, and we're lucky that people are doing a lot of Zooming lately. So it's traveling better, these meetings, and we're getting different people attend them. So I think if you had an Isle of Wight public meeting on a Zoom, and you hopefully could get someone like, you know, who's semi-pro it or neutral from government and just understanding, you know, what the risks are, and then find out if someone like George Monbiot will come on and support your cause. And there's no reason they won't. If they supported ours, what I'll do, Vix, the guy who booked all our amazing speakers, he was amazing, Alan Todd. Oh, what a diligent man. He would never take no for an answer, and he would hound you till you gave in. I mean, George Monbiot got sick and he let him be for a little while, but then he started on him again until he came. You know, eventually he breaks you, you know. And yeah, so I would say that it's like even Andrew Cooper walked from Yorkshire to Lancashire, and we bathed his feet when he got here, poor soul, and he planted a tree. But you know, the amazing things people are willing to do for you that give you that credibility. But I'll get Alan Todd's list, and I'll put him in touch with you, Vix, and then everyone he's contacted who supported us will automatically be in support of you, and then it's just their availability. But it's making yourselves credible. Like, I remember the day when George Monbiot came up, and the police really do treat you a bit like poo, and they don't respect you, because it was a lot of women, and it's quite a misogynistic thing. But there was a lot of women on our site, on our protest. I think because women's health was most immediately impacted. You know, chances of breast cancer increase, chances of carrying a baby full term are reduced, chances of children being born with breathing difficulties and so on is high. All of those things brought a lot of women to the fight. So consequently, the women, and they were really stubborn anyway, so once they came to the side of the road, they never went home. You know, they were diligent, determined. But the police would look at you like you were stupid, like you're just someone who was silly, and you were overreacting. And then up comes George Monbiot or Jeremy Corbyn or Caroline Lucas, and they stand there and they tell you their truths. And someone academic like Julia Steinberger would stand up and tell you the facts. And the police would be silent as they're watching, and the security guards, realizing all the things we said were clearly true because these wise people who understood the subject agreed. I mean, I don't care where they believe the credibility. A bunch of nanas clearly we were never striving for their intellectual support. We were there to keep them busy, you know. But yeah, once you got the big people on board, that really matters, you know.
Thank you, Tina. I see there's a question here from Peter. So would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you, and greetings, Islanders. I'm a true colkhead, but I sadly don't live there anymore. And lovely to see you again, Tina. It was in a muddy field at Greenbelt, I think we last saw one another. My question is a sort of technical question, and that is, with the news about fracking, they were saying that perhaps the reserves they were completely overstated at the beginning. And so that brings into the question viability. And at this pre-stage for the island, is there some technical or geophysical work or scientific work? Is there an avenue there that could be pursued? Thank you.
Vix, you touched on it already earlier when you said about, you know, recoverable amounts, because they'll always state that there is this much that's there underground just waiting to be tapped. But the recoverable amount will be between 3 and 7%, because not all of it's accessible. You can't drill a hole every second to get at it, and there is no way. So it's like between 3% and 7% that you're going to get. But as Vic says, at this stage, they don't take into account the economics of it, the way the government does it. I gave evidence in the House of Lords back in 2012, and there was like a horseshoe of lords, including Lawson and all the most awful people. And what they want to do is compartmentalize. So say where they say it's only a test drill, so they're not applying for fracking license or a full-on production site. It's just a test drill. But of course, once you've got a site that did some test drilling, you're there. And now you say, oh, it's just another one of those to do another test, until eventually they've adapted that planning one step at a time. And with ours, like 14 changes to the traffic management plan within the first year, you know, and you say you can't do that. Where's your wheel wash? Why is this not happening? Why are you turning left, not right in your traffic management plan? It says you can't do that. And then they go straight back to the council, change the traffic management plan, and off they go again. House of Lords said to me, which one of the points is your red light? You know, is it the air pollution or the water or the earthquakes or the blah, 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 blah? And I couldn't discuss each thing in its individuality, because to me, there is one problem, and that's this in its entirety. But what they'll do during planning is they'll break it down just a site, just a 0.99 hectare. We won't go over it. We won't have to do this. And it's what they call it mission creep, don't they? They start with a little and then they take. But they take it in compartments, so they won't discuss the economics now. They won't discuss what happens with well abandonment now. They won't discuss that sort of future. They will discuss this tiny little box. And there's not much I ever found to make them not do that. And I don't know what you can do, Vix, as a councillor, to make them go to a broader picture. But it's like when you object to planning, inevitably you're objecting on traffic and noise, which is really, to us, it's about health. We got one of our doctors to say, to go in and be the voice about the noise and the traffic, but then he went on to say, which impacts your health because the lack of sleep will lead to this, compounded by. But, you know, you're in a very small field and with very small choice of weapons to fight in, and they won't look at the next field. They won't look. So what's your experience of that been, Vix? And I'm sorry, that's not much help.
I think can I just add on that, is that, you know, our argument anyway is all the fossil fuel reserves we know about already need to stay in the ground, or 70% of what we know of already needs to stay in the ground. So in some ways you can argue down, you know, go down a dark hole as to how much is there, how much is recoverable, because that's not really our main climate change argument. But it is useful to have some details, and and different people will be interested in different things. So I personally used to get so frustrated when we were arguing about variations on the traffic management plan on the lorries coming in and out building the site, that some people would get really, really upset. And that's right, because it was a bit about, if we can't believe you on this, you said this is how you're going to do it, you gave us your traffic management, and you're not abiding by that, you know, you're not sticking to the basic road safety guidance in that. So it was like saying, well, how can we trust you with the really big issues if you can't even keep to the small details of your plan?
So it's dark holes literally and metaphorically then.
Yeah.
Did I see you had a question, Sue?
I'm waving my pen around as I'm thinking. Sorry, it's not me with a question.
Okay. Has anybody else got any more questions? Okay, well, thank you for all coming on.
I think there's one in the chat that was a gentleman who was leaving. Or is it?
Yeah,
Sam?
there is something from Sam Alston from the Young Greens, who was asking a question, saying that he is fascinated about this because he's currently studying fracking firms. And one of the things that's notable is how protests and activism changed the narrative from what they were talking about in the shareholder reports last decade, just to make us feel all particularly old. And we can see that on the island, and I know that the Frack Free Isle of Wight are closely following and monitoring this, not just share price, but what shareholders are saying about this situation. And obviously that message goes around. What was interesting, Tina, I was teaching A-level geography in 2015, and Preston New Road was on the A-level geography paper. I don't know if you knew that. There was a whole booklet of pre-release material, and I was sitting the exam as well as teaching it. It's a very strange position to be in. And they released the pre-material, and it was fracking, and it was a map of Preston New Road area, and it was a video we had to watch, all sorts of charts. You know, that would not have been on the A-level exam paper if it hadn't been pushed through onto that national coverage level, which is what we're going to have to prepare to do here on the island. in the coming.
I think that's why we have to reach so far outside our bubbles.
Yeah.
You know, like if I'd have just stayed an activist and not spoken to Gina, you know, you had to have your activists meet your councillors, meet your housewives, for all of those different perspectives to come at it. Because I think that people would worry about this. Other people, like Gina just said, would say, oh, but I worry about this, I'm worried about that. But you need to bring those all in together. And to get that, you know, it's really simple. There's actually a really good, some of the different groups had different approaches. I'd say the best online group I ever saw as an activist was Frack Free Lancashire. Bloody amazing. Full of facts and information. And they did a really quick and easy print sheet of 10 basic questions about fracking. So not much good to you because it says the word fracking, but you can easily adapt this, and it will totally match your cause. And that little 10 sheet, 10 thing, gave every single person the right answers to every question that would ever be asked of them. Like, well, how would an earthquake happen? Blah, blah, blah. And all of these things are answered clearly in less than 2 sentences. So everyone could manage their talking points. And that's the other thing too, is don't just shove people at the front who always get shoved at the front. Sometimes it's really good, like some of our best people, once we got them speaking, were, you know, like the people who'd never spoken before, you know, the retired school teachers and people like that, because they would be listened to differently. And never worry about the professionalism. If you come over with ahs and ums and you don't quite get it right, all the better. I remember Gina quite, when I used to shove a microphone in front of her quite a lot, and she'd always go, oh, you know, what I want preparation. But what I loved most was that when Gina spoke, she spoke from the heart. I loved listening to her speak. Everyone instantly warmed and recognized this is a human with knowledge telling me truths. And that's so important, you know, just that continuous, keeping that in mind in all you do, that it's not about being professional or clever. It's about delivering the information people need to hear and helping them to understand how it relates to them personally.
Thank you. Sue, you've got your hand up.
This time I do have a question, and I've put my pen down. Well, first a suggestion. Vix, you probably have the contacts for this, but I think it's time to get the Isle of Wight fracking on the A-level paper, genuinely. I think if you have contacts with anyone, get it on there, because that's a lot of kids and a lot of negative publicity. And secondly, I don't know if there's any, I missed the very beginning, but actually it was really before we started. I don't know if there's any possibility of me getting particularly Gina and Tina's contact details, because I just have an idea of something I might be able to write, just to explore the possibility of writing something with them. So if Gina and Tina are happy, Vix, could you share their details with me, please?
Yeah, I think they're putting some, Tina's put her email in the chat box, Sue.
Okay, lovely.
So that's great. Thanks, Tina, for sharing that.
Super, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah, we're really happy to support in anything that we can be of help with. Obviously, it's difficult with lockdown, but anything at all we can do. And if we can start finding some socially distanced ways of having a presence, then we'll look at that. For now, a lot of what we're doing, particularly with our nanas, is online, because we're keeping everyone safe until we decide it's safe enough, you know. But yeah, certainly anything we can do to help, then we'll absolutely get in there with you.
Thank you.
So I know that talking about actions and things, we have done a few on the island, socially distance and stuff, getting people together, but we actually have one coming up on Friday, which has been kind of kept below public eye by Extinction Rebellion and stuff. So stuff is going on around the island, obviously socially distanced, but making islanders aware, obviously, what's going on. So we are starting up that process again, but obviously carefully. So thank you, everybody. Oh, Steve's got his hand up. Steve, you're on mute still.
Okay, I'm not really good with Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point to people here that we are not fighting fracking at the moment. In fact, we've made a big effort to distance ourselves from the F word, because it's been a huge distraction. That's why we've specifically branded this campaign "Don't Drill the Wight," because fracking takes people off down all sorts of blind holes. And the company has already stated that they will not massively hydraulically frack the island. Now, we know the subtleties of the terminology and the legal definitions and all the rest of it. But we've been pretty successful at removing the F word. And actually, I think it's improved our support level. We've recognised through our studies over the past 4 or 5 years and learning from groups like yourself and looking at the impacts that people really feel day to day, that actually what happens under the ground, with the exception of earthquakes, well, actually what happens under the ground is largely irrelevant. Most of the pollution risks, most of the disruption to daily life is what you see above ground. And it's actually easier, we found, to get people motivated about those issues than it is to go off down a sort of technical blind hole discussing about fracturing rocks a kilometre below the ground. So we are not fighting this on an anti-fracking ticket.
I totally think that's exactly the right move. The don't drill is everything, because they will keep manipulating words and making them difficult to work with. I agree entirely with the drilling. Don't drill the Wight is a good campaign, and I think it's a highly visual thing. Fracking was always an ugly word to deal with. They messed about with it. You know, it's one of those things that was really hard to carry and to work out. And also always knowing that there were so many other unconventional approach extraction techniques, but we couldn't say fracking but fracking had already been established as a word because of what was going on. So we had to deal with what we had. But given the choice, I would have said don't drill, because the whole point is don't go under there. But a lot of the overlaps, though, Steve, that are useful to us, particularly at meetings like this, where we can find out from each other. It's like when you say that what goes on underground is not of any importance to anyone. I agree. We had a visual done where they reversed and they showed that, you know, all those down pipes and all those horizontals, and they reversed it. So as if that was on top of the ground. People were stunned at the amount of infrastructure that would be under their homes. So yeah, it's not seen, but it is a handy visual. That's on the Rydale site as well. I'll give you the details in a minute on the side chat. But I agree. I think stick your ground with the don't drilling, because then that covers you for all the other eventualities that they'll squirm out of. The fact that we know it's fracking by another name just means that we happen to at least have the insight to know where to go for some of the knowledge. But to fight this one, keep it to drilling. And in the same way that we talk about things like climate, but it's easier to talk about pollution and the environment you're living in. Keep people to think about the local impact on them. You know, getting everyone to care about the planet when we're in the middle of a global pandemic, everyone's struggling financially. It's hard enough to do anything, but to focus at least on keeping your little place safe as you can for your kids is something we can all fight with. You know, not in my backyard is a good thing. If we all protected our backyards, there wouldn't be any of this crap. So, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And we've been lucky, well, not lucky, but we've benefited from all your experiences, and actually our current campaign has gone so much better than we even imagined. We're at something like 1,150 objections as of this evening.
Fantastic. I'm so sorry, I have to go, and I'm aware you might carry on a little bit longer, but someone was asking for the Rydale website link. Have you got that to hand, Tina? Because I'm on my iPad here and I can't do that and type it in immediately. Well done. No sooner said than done.
Thank you, Gina. I think we're going to bring the meeting to a close anyway, because we said it was going on till 8 o'clock. If anybody desperately does want to stay back and ask either me or Cameron, or if Steve's around, that'd be great. But I guess we bring the meeting to a close, especially listening to Gina and Tina. Cameron for organising all of this. Cameron, it's been a fantastic event. I've written down sheets and sheets and sheets of ideas and inspiration and stories that Gina and Tina have come up with. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, Cameron?
Just a massive thank you to you both, and yeah, it's great to learn from your experiences. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we all meet.
Yeah, don't forget, go make sure that you have objected to this planning application in this public consultation by Friday. And if you go to the don'tdrillthewight.co.uk, all the information you need in order to do that is on that website. and that, you know, as Steve says, the campaign is doing really well, but we need even more involvement. It seems to be snowballing in that regard, and that's been a brilliant thing to watch. Thank you.
Good luck, everyone, and hopefully see you again. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina.
Bye for now. Bye.
For everything. Good luck. Available
Thank
in links. We've got the website in the corner. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Bye.